China.
China's scale makes generalizations slippery. Every region pushes the conversation in a new direction. Yet the through line is clear enough. Civilizations formed here in cycles. Unifications, expansions, each leaving frameworks that shaped governance, agriculture, scholarship, and trade. Systems of writing, engineering, and social rituals developed early. And then reshaped themselves repeatedly. As dynasties rose and melded into the next phase. Even now, the country's pace of change creates a parallel tension. Continuity through tradition. Transformation through ambition. Geography compounds that complexity. Rivers cut routes that became economic corridors. Mountain chains formed barriers that influenced political boundaries for centuries. Coastal plains drew merchants. Inland basins sustained dense communities. Natural formations. Plateaus. Forests. Deserts. Forced architectural and land use solutions that still guide modern planning. Travel here inspires one to envision how decisions made thousands of years ago continue to shape infrastructure. Cuisine. And regional identity today. That context matters because it explains why certain ideas spread while others stayed local. Stay with us until the end for the country's most photographed landmark. I guarantee it's not what you think. Visitors come with their own ideas of China. What they've read about or what they've seen in films. They find something warmer, something kinder, and something distinctly more modern. For many, China defies simplified explanations. It shows complexity, variety, and a mix of old and new in ways that flip prior ideas. This is China. Shanghai. Shanghai is a megacity on China's eastern coast and is China's largest metropolis. Shanghai was built on low, marshy ground reclaimed from the sea. It is divided by the Huangpu River and run as a provincial-level municipality. The name itself, Shang meaning above plus Hai meaning sea, demonstrates that relationship to tide and shipping more directly than any slogan ever could. The city grew from fishing villages and textile workshops into a treaty port in the 1800s. Its expansion was fueled by the finance, shipping, and manufacturing industries that now anchor the Yangtze River Delta. That growth built layered streetscapes, historic colonial-era blocks, mid-century housing, and new super-tall clusters. Sharing a shoreline that doubles as the city's postcard skyline and its economic shop window. Long-term residents talk more about micro-neighborhoods, coffee routes, and small work and play circuits than about ticking off landmarks, which illustrates a city that changes noticeably between short visits. For travelers, Shanghai serves as both an entry point and a standalone destination. Making it an easy first stop before deeper trips inland. Give it a few concentrated days. Pick one or two districts instead of doing everything. And the city pays you back in clarity about modern China that no overnight layover can match. Suzhou. Suzhou is a canal-divided city in the Jiangnan region. Just inland from Shanghai. It is a prefecture-level hub whose core still wraps around an old river loop and a grid of narrow streets. For more than 2,000 years, this lowland has alternated between rice fields, silk workshops, and merchant houses. Giving Suzhou a long run as a trade and textile center in the Yangtze Delta. Classical garden culture grew out of that prosperity. turning private residences into tightly composed compounds rather than sprawling parks. Travel writers now talk about the way canals, small alleys, and garden walls fold into each other at a comfortable walking pace. Especially when you use Suzhou as a base town instead of a half-day add-on from Shanghai. High-speed trains, metro extensions, and regional transportation have made the city extremely easy to insert into wider Jiangsu and Shanghai itineraries. So, adding Suzhou into your travel is more about schedule room than logistics. Give it enough time to slow your pace to a few neighborhoods instead of a checklist. And Suzhou quietly upgrades the whole Yangtze Delta trip from a straight urban run to something more intimate and real. Hangzhou. Hangzhou is a regional capital centered around the iconic West Lake. That grew into a full-scale Chinese metropolis wrapped around waterways in use for centuries. The city runs along the lower reaches of the Jiang River. Tying coastal trade routes to inland river systems and placing it squarely inside the Yangtze River Delta's economic belt. This was once the seat of the Southern Song Court. A hub for officials, artisans, and merchants moving documents, silk, tea, and grain along canals and causeways. Tea cultivation, silk production, and lakeside culture combined, creating a place known across China for exquisite landscapes tied directly to working trades. Contemporary Hangzhou embraces this mix of soft edges and complex infrastructure. Conservation of green corridors and water lines is as important as building tech campuses, conference centers. Experimental architecture that folds hills, roofs, and bridges into one visual field provide a striking contrast to the historic tea and silk trades. For many travelers, that combination is the memory they carry home. An example of how a modern Chinese city can expand, digitize, and still keep land, water, and tradition visibly in the frame. Guilin. Guilin is a prefecture-level city in the northeastern Guangxi Autonomous Region. It is wrapped around a bend of the breathtaking Lijiang River. And dominated by tightly packed karst hills. That push the city into long corridors between the limestone peaks. The name Guilin, Forest of Osmanthus, goes back to early times and reflects how planners and poets alike tied the place to the fragrant, centuries-old osmanthus trees that abound in the area. Today, the city covers a wide area of compact urban districts. Smaller satellite towns, terrace country, and river valleys, all grouped under the same city label. Centuries of canal work, especially the ancient link between the Yangtze and Pearl River systems, turned Guilin into a nexus for travel across South China. That role drew in merchants, government, and soldiers. Whose roots later became the scaffolding for transportation lines that now feed modern tourism and regional business. treat Guilin as either a base or an introduction. A place where river cruises, scenic caves, rice terraces, and photo tours provide magical opportunities before you move out towards smaller river towns and terrace villages. You may leave with the understanding that Guilin is a landscape that reshapes how you remember the rest of China. Yangshuo. Further into the karst country of Guangxi, Yangshuo is a small town at the center of a county that wraps around river bends. Farm villages, and steep limestone hills into one tight region. In Yangshuo, guest houses, cafes, and river transportation routes cluster before the land breaks outward into ridges and fields. When written, the name Yangshuo combines Chinese characters associated with light and the new moon, a neat clue that people here have long considered how this landscape looks in both daylight and nighttime. For centuries, farming and river trade shaped daily life. With markets and river moorings giving the town a role much larger than its footprint suggests. In recent decades, budget accommodations and outdoor outfitters have turned Yangshuo into a low-key travel hub. Where bikers, climbers, and photographers branch out along minor roads and narrow lanes for a self-paced adventure. Yangshuo is often the place visitors remember as the moment Guangxi's maps turned into something they could actually embrace in their souls. Chengdu. Chengdu is a landlocked giant in western China, a sub-provincial capital that has spent more than 2,000 years refining the art of big city life at a slower, steadier pace. Chengdu has existed as a capital city for over 2,300 years. uniquely retaining its name throughout the millennia. Ancient Shu kingdoms and Qin engineers. Built its iconic irrigation system. Which developed Chengdu into a long-running center for agriculture and trade across Sichuan. That same role shows up today in modern hub. And spoke transportation routes radiating from the city. With logistics parks and tech districts, now sharing space with tea houses and neighborhood parks. Recent decades added another layer. Experimental museums, wetland parks, and landscaped riverfronts designed by architects who treat the city as a test bed for new Chinese urban forms. Travelers who give Chengdu more than a quick panda stop often end up echoing the same conclusion in their trip notes. This is the place where China's past comfort with city living and its current push toward design-driven growth mesh into a lifestyle they could easily visit again and again. Leshan. Leshan is a river city in southern Sichuan. A prefecture-level hub built where three waterways knot together. And then peel apart toward Chengdu. A Meishan. And the countryside beyond. The name Leshan, Happy Mountain in everyday translation, points straight at the nearby hills that have shaped trade routes. Temple building. And even the way the modern skyline steps around ridges and cliffs. Residents here have juggled water and rock since early Shu and Han times, carving ports, warehouses, terraces, and religious complexes into the stone riverbanks while towns grew behind them. Later, that framework was upgraded turning Leshan into a practical base for moving between lowland plains, forested slopes, and areas deeper inside southwest Sichuan. Visitors usually arrive expecting a single tick-box landmark and end up talking about the bigger picture. An easy food culture. Walkable riverfronts. And short jumps out to older towns that give the place more depth than a quick day trip can cover. Many leave saying Leshan quietly shifted their Sichuan itinerary. From a one-stop detour into a corner they would gladly fold back into a future return. Xi'an. Xi'an is a historically significant inland capital on the Wei River Plain. A sub-provincial city whose current name, Western Peace, quietly advertises both its location and its long career as a seat of power for 13 dynasties. For more than 1,000 years, earlier versions of Xi'an were home to emperors, envoys, and caravans heading out across Central Asia. It is still known as the eastern anchor of the old Silk Road routes. The city plan tells that past in a very literal way. A Ming-era defensive wall still wraps the central districts in a clean rectangle. While newer roads, rail lines, and ring roads spread outward toward more modern parts of the city. Within that frame, older streets, religious quarters, and markets preserve a pattern set centuries ago. Even as contemporary towers and shopping malls rise behind them. Home to the famous Terracotta Army, try to give Xi'an more than a quick warrior stop. This is where China's dynastic timelines stop feeling abstract. And start looking like a living historical picture of the power of ancient China. Mount Huashan. High above the Wei River Plain, Mount Huashan, also known as Mount Hua, hugs 5 granite peaks into a tight cluster of ridges. Stairways, and cliff paths that feel more like a vertical maze than a single mountain. Guides classify it as one of China's 5 great mountains and a core scenic area of Shanxi, with everything organized around that compact, steep massif rather than a town grid. For centuries, worshippers climbed these slopes to reach Taoist temples. Dizzying rock platforms, and singularly inspirational meditation sites cut directly into ledges. Turning the mountain into a recognized grotto heaven in religious geography. Modern engineers added cableways, tunnels, and reinforced stairs. Still, the basic arrangement remains simple. Lower forests, exposed upper ridges, and a loop of vertical peaks that can be linked in a long day. If your legs and the weather cooperate. Travelers now arrive primed by world's most dangerous hike headlines, then leave with a more nuanced verdict. Yes, it is a demanding climb with moments that sharpen your focus. But it is also a clear lesson in how Chinese culture, engineering, and landscape design meet on a single piece of rock. Strong enough that many say they would return, given a bit more training and time. Lijiang. Lijiang is a highland city in northwest Yunnan. But the part that draws people in is its old town. A Naxi trading center and UNESCO World Heritage Site. Laid out across uneven ground, where spring-fed canals run between stone lanes and timber houses. The town is named for the rivers that made this possible. with the wider prefecture now wrapping modern districts, minority villages, and mountain basins around that original core. For centuries, Naxi communities here used Lijiang as a stop on the Tea-Horse Road, moving tea, salt, and horses between Yunnan, Tibet, and Sichuan, while developing the Dongba script. Rituals and music that still give the place its particular identity. UNESCO notes that instead of walls, the town relied on terrain and waterworks. A gravity-fed system that splits flow from nearby springs into channels, fountains, and irrigation lines, keeping lanes, courtyards, and fields linked by the same network. Tourism has reshaped the center. But it is still a place to slow down between side trips. Learn about Naxi culture, and maybe start planning to revisit before you've even left. Zhangjiajie. National Forest Park. Zhangjiajie National Forest Park is a sandstone peak forest in northern Hunan. In this compact national park, thousands of quartz pillars rise from deep green basins within the larger Wuling Yuan Scenic Area. Geologists explain the pillars as quartz sandstone sliced by fractures and then shaped by water, wind, and the freeze-thaw cycle of an extreme climate. This unusual process gave the cliffs their squared edges and improbable heights. That inspired the floating Hallelujah Mountains in the movie Avatar. Park records indicate that this was China's first national forest park in 1982 and later became part of a UNESCO World Heritage listing. With Tujia and other ethnic groups living in villages around the core scenic zones and supplying much of the area's craft and performance culture. Travelers who plan 2 or 3 days instead of a quick cable car dash usually value that decision. Zhangjiajie National Forest Park. does more than match its movie reputation. It quietly resets a screen image into a real, walkable maze of stone you might want to come back and navigate again. Beijing. Beijing, the beautifully modern and fantastically historic capital of China. A municipality-scale city stretched across the North China Plain. Where an old imperial axis ring roads, and subway lines all point toward the hills and the Great Wall beyond them. Over 3 millennia, it has worn titles such as Yanjing, Dadu, and Beiping. But Beijing, northern capital, stuck once emperors fixed their court here to balance other centers farther south. Wall near Beijing climbs along the ridges in long, stepped bands of brick and stone. Forming a delicately worked spine that turns each hilltop into a scenic viewpoint. It began as separate earthen and stone frontier walls built by several states. And was extended under the first Qin emperor. And later dynasties. Especially the Ming. To defend northern borders and protect routes. Today, the surviving sections around Beijing and beyond function as preserved cultural relics. And highly prized hiking and sightseeing areas for visitors from around the world. Even visible from space. The Great Wall is among the most heavily photographed fortifications on Earth. The sections near Beijing are among the most sought after for views. They work less as barriers these days. And more as open-air galleries linking visitors to China's storied past. Down on the plain, Beijing keeps doing that same job in civilian form. Organizing power, transport, and culture for a considerable slice of China, while still letting visitors trace older plans in the courtyard alleys and ceremonial spaces that survived each round of rebuilding. The wall might have drawn people here, but it is Beijing's scale, structure, and habits that quietly set the bar for everything else they see in China afterward. China has a way of widening one's view. Invest in adventure. Plan a trip. And spare the time to let China in. And you may find that it leaves you with your mind, heart, and eyes wide open.